education, but as she said, we know each other for more than 25 years, but she's much more younger than I am. But it's a pleasure to work with him. I also would like to thank Ambassador Carlos Manuel Joaquin Gonzalez of the Embassy of Mexico in Canada for co-organizing this event. I'm going to talk about water diplomacy, and I will make some emphasis on some examples, but there will be one example I think it's very, very relevant. It's the example of water cooperation between Canada and United States in Mexico, because it really describes a lot of the things that have been done on this matter. And actually, all the treaties we have, these three countries, have been the basis to prepare all the international legislation and the international framework on the legal international framework on water. Next, please. Next, okay, well, water. Well, most of you have been thinking about conflicts in terms of nations, and we normally think on problems with land, on all these problems. But sharing water is a much more delicate, much more complex issue. First of all, because we are sharing a resource, and a resource that is part of human rights. So it's very complicated when one country wants to use the water for economic purpose, while the other country needs the water only for people to drink and people to live. But as well, because water has multiple uses. It has uses not only for economic or for the economical activities, but as well has other uses like cultural, aesthetic uses, and try to share something which this different purpose is complicated. But one thing is very, very good about water, and most of the people doesn't know that, is that water is a renewable resource. Most of the people think that water is not a renewable resource, but in fact we can use water, and it's not like oil. If you take 1 barrel of petrol and you use it, the petrol disappears. But if you take 1 barrel of water and you use it, after that you have the water. Maybe it will be polluted, but after treatment you can recover it. So we can use the water all many times. Well, I don't know how many times in the life, because in fact the amount of water that we have now of the present day is with the same amount of water there was thousands of years ago in the earth, because the water is not destroyed. But at a local space, if everybody takes the water, we will have limitations on its use, because we cannot use all the water that is in a region at the same time. So this is the reason why it creates conflicts when we are sharing water. Next slide, please. In fact, conflicts have been documented since many years ago. There is a very interesting database, the Pacific Institute database, and it has all the conflicts that, well, not all, but all the registered conflicts that have been uploaded. You can upload a conflict in that database if you have the information. And we know that 2,500 years before in our era, there has been already conflicts, and water has been also already used as weapon. And for example, the King Urlama of Lagash dry up the canals and ponds to have the ownership of Mesopotamia. And we know even now that water is at the core of the conflicts and even used as weapon. Next slide, please. Which are the causes of conflicts? First, most of all, we are competing for the use of water. When you have an industry, for instance, or when you have a village and you have the agriculture, all these three uses compete for the same amount of water at the same time. And then we have problems about who is using what and how much they are using. Also, there are many other conflicts that are arising from other causes like lands. Sometimes countries, sometimes inside countries or outside countries, they divide the land. And in one area, you have the sources of water, and the other area, you have the people who are using the water. And then we have start having conflicts. Migration is also a source of conflicts because all the migrants start demanding water. And we have seen when you have massive amount of people migrating from one place to another inside a country or from one country to another, they arrive to sites where they need education, they need food, but they also need water. And for that, we need to have a source of water. Because as well, all the services related of water, all people, besides the resources, wants to have the service of water, which is the supply of water and sanitation. The lack of attention of some to other vulnerable groups or marginalized groups, even there are cases of racism in some countries where simply the poor people or the lowest caste of people have the most polluted water in the region, while the rich are using the good water quality. Because of environmental goals, when one state wants to protect a wetland and the state that is next to these wants to have economic development, we can have also conflicts. The use of authority related to water when the authority doesn't know how to manage the conflicts or is very, very strict with users. There are also many other conflicts. Sometimes they can use water can be used as weapon or as vector for other objectives. Next slide, please. So, well, I have all somehow mentioned this, is that the conflict all happens within a same community. For instance, when you have different social classes, then inside a community, you can have conflicts of water. You can have as well conflicts between different communities that are in a same region, but also we have conflicts between different countries, and you have in there a list of some examples of different countries that have problems of water among them. Next slide, please. All these conflicts, if you take the database I was telling you, the Pacific Institute database, most of the conflicts are related farmers, and also most of the conflicts are between farmers and cities. And or when cities are refusing to share the water with another city, or when water is upstream, when one city is upstream to another city that might be in the same or a different country, and the first city release the used water into a river, then we have conflicts of pollution of water bad quality in the other country. Most of these problems are enhanced when there are droughts. And we know that there are many countries that have more and more problems. One of these is the United States, Peru, Australia, and recently even in France, which was, it was thought it was a temperate country with enough water. They start having problems of water, and the problem of lack of water or apparently lack of water is getting worse all over the world. Next slide, please. Now, talking about countries, we have as well as this problem of hegemony, and it's also, we are also talking about water hegemony problems, and we have hegemonic countries that use their power to get the water of the others. And the problem is that in most of the cases, when countries are sharing water, you always have a country that has more power than the other. And when their treaties are prepared, of course, the country with much more power or much more economic development gets much more water than the other country. And this is something that little by little, the United States and different agreements are trying to readdress to have a more fair share of water among countries. Next slide, please. Which are how a country gets the control of water? One thing they use incentives. They start giving incentives to develop different type of uses of water that release more water for them. And when the other country realize that they don't have water, the country that was giving the incentive have already take the control of the water. Also, the legal instruments are used. The positions, normally the country that is upstream always get hold of the water, and the country that is downstream is less protected, because if simply the country that is upstream, if it doesn't allow the water to flow to the other country, the last one will have problems. The institutions, the truth creation, they start developing a story like, this country is polluting the water, is making a not efficient use of water, and they start saying that because in their country water is protected and the water is used efficiently, they should take the water and keep the water with them. Financial mechanisms, that's also a way to get more control of water, and even coercive mechanisms, really using the force in many degrees is also a way to control water. Next slide, please. Some of the main areas, well, I already talked about the main areas, but not only in water scarce areas are problems of water, but even where water is very abundant and there are dams, we can also see conflicts between one country and another, because if one country put a dam, then they are not allowing the water to flow to the second dam, or the way in which they operate the dam, they can flood the country that is downstreams. In total, at least 50 countries on the 5 continents have problems of water at the level of, well, at international level. Some of the countries are several of these countries are in Africa, because first of all, as you may know, Africa political division was done artificially by all the countries that were colonializing these countries. And as they were done artificially, they don't follow the basins, and there is no logic concerning the sources of water. An important example is Burundi, Congo, Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Sudan, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda, which are all on the same basin. They are sharing the basin, and Africa is an area where the amount of people is growing very, very fast. And not only the people, but also the need to have a better economic development, and for that they need to have water. And this creates a competition for the water resource that ends on having conflicts. We have the high region of the Nile and the low region of the Nile, which is also very well known problem between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, and later Sudan was also split in 2 countries. And the problem in there, it's really, really very complicated, because Egypt, which is the country, the downstream country, and it was, let's say, first developed, and I'd say developed with a way to say it. They took advantage and they prepared an agreement who is taking more of the water from all the countries, and is difficult to manage. The Indus Basin, where we can find India and Pakistan, is also a very interesting example, because in this example, what we have is a problem of water that is created by a problem between 2 regions that has nothing to do with water, but the lack of understanding ends reflecting on the lack of water for one country to another, because one country is upstream to the other, and it simply doesn't get the water to flow to the second one. Next, please. And I will spend a little bit more time. The others I only want to use like example on these two examples because they are very, very interesting. And the one is the water situation between the United States and Canada. And later I will talk about the water situation between the United States and Mexico. And, oh, this was not the first one. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. In later, the slide will be there, but in the 1901, in the site of the Niagara Falls, it was soon very, very evident that they need to have a treaty between the United States and Canada because there was a lot of water, and there was a divergent vision, a vision from one country that wanted to have more industries, while another country wanted to have a better environmental protection. That ended with a treaty, the 1009 treaty, in which these two countries, Canada and United States, established a joint commission to internationally manage water. And it worked very well. There were other problems along the region. We all know that Canada has a lot of water and a big boundary with the United States. So there are a lot of points of connection of the two countries, not only from the perspective of the land that they share, but also from the perspective of the water that they share. Later, and the first half of the 20th century, there was a problem with the Columbia River Basin. You can see in the photo this basin. And while in the Canada, a rich water country have a lower population than the United States start growing and start promoting economic development. And they wanted to produce a lot of hydraulic energy. And to maximize the production of electricity, they needed to have a control of water in the proper time. And at the same time, they had floods in their area from the water that came from Canada when it rained. So United States thought that Canada should build dams in their territory for them to have energy and for them to be protected by floods. And they say that it should be Canada, the one that would be paying for the dams. And Canada say, well, no, we're not going to build the dams because we don't need the dams. If you need your dams, build it in your country. It became a very, very big discussion. And at the end, they, at the same time, the United States was discussing with Mexico. And with Mexico, the upstream country was United States, while Mexico was the downstream country. Canada, as I mentioned, Canada was the upstream country and the downstream country was the United States. So in the South, what the United States wanted was as well to have a lot of water for economic development, and they don't wanted to share the water with Mexico. Next slide, please. Well, just more or less what I have mentioned. Maybe, okay, next slide. So in Mexico, we have the Colorado River, and it's from the Colorado River and the Rio Grande, or the Rio Bravo, the way we call it in Mexico, were the two rivers from which United States didn't want to share water with Mexico. So they also have talked about a doctrine that is called, next slide, please. Here, the U.S. Attorney General Harmon established a doctrine where they said that any country could have all the power or all the sovereignty about the water that were within the boundaries, and they could use that water as much as they wanted. And in this, at this state, and maybe I went very fast with the slides, I want you to think about the river. Just think about a river. First, a river that is flowing within a same country between different states. So my question to you, and try to think, is to whom belong the water in a river? First, at the beginning, you have all the river flowing along 4 or 5 states, and everybody has the right to use this water and starts development to develop cities, to develop a business, to develop to have agricultural land and irrigation. But little by little, all these uses began to grow, and if the upstream states says that all the water that is raining in the area belongs to them, and they use all this water, at the end of the river, people won't have water. So this is something, it's a very difficult discussion, but at the end, which is more or less agreed, but still we have problems, is that everybody has the right to have water. It doesn't matter where it rains, but the river always have to have water for everybody to share it. And this is important because as well, now we know even how to create rain in one area. So when you are creating rain by seeding the clouds with silver and you create the rain, then you are not allowing this rain to go to another area to be the water there. And this is also a matter of discussion to whom belong the clouds, and that one is not yet solved. But when the water has already been, is on a river, everybody in the river has to have the right to use water. And there is one right that it goes above everybody, above any use, and is the right, the human right to water, the right to drink water. That is to say that if I have an industry and if I have downstreams people that needs to drink water, the priority is the people to have to drink water. So while there was this discussion in the north with Canada and the United States were saying, well, you need to put dams and you need to control the water and you need to pay for the dams. In the south, the United States was telling to Mexico, we're going to keep all the water and we're not going to give you the water because we're going to apply the Harmon Doctrine because of this Attorney General. And that's the reasoning that Canada used against the United States. They say, using your doctrine that you said that any country is the owner of the water that is in their territory, we're not going to allow any water to go to the United States. And this was the origin to have the Columbia River Treaty, in which the United States at the end shared most of share the benefits of the use of water and give the Canada an entitlement to use the electricity in their own. So they were producing all this power in their dams, and they offered to the Canada the electricity. First, Canada was not using this electricity, and there was something like 20 or 30 years in which this electricity was going to be used in the United States, but the United States were going to pay to Canada for this, for the power. And also all this, and also because the dams were used to protect the rest of the part of this area of the United States from floods, they receive an amount of money about protection. So that's what happened, and that time, and it was solved in that way. But also because the United States also recognized that the water should be shared, that also gave to Mexico the opportunity, next slide, to have a treaty in which we are receiving the water we are supposed to have from this river, and we can use in Mexico for its development. One decision was taken, next slide, please. One decision was taken that is that here you can see the water treaty, and these two rivers, the North and the Bravo River. And there are several states that are involved, both in the part of the United States and in the part of Mexico. It's a complicated, it was a very complicated treaty to be signed. It took more than 90 years to be agreed. And it has a lot of science behind it, because there was need to decide how we were going to share the water if there were floods, how we were going to decide to share the water if there were droughts, and there is a lot of theory behind it to make all these calculations. Next slide, please. So this treaty of here 80 years, but what is important is that these two treaties are the core of all the legal framework of international water. So these three countries that now we are bounded by an economic treaty, we were at the core, and we have given all the basis for the Helsinki Convention that it was signed in 1996 for waters in Europe. But all the principles we have developed, the three countries, because a lot of negotiations are the basis of this Helsinki Convention as well as the other treaty. Next slide, please. Which are the principles that are important? First, a systematic exchange and harmonization of information with set periods. Which kind of information? If one country wants to develop a project, they need to inform the other country that they are planning a project that will be using water. This is very important, for example, for the case of the Nile River, in which a dam was built without informing the downstream countries. Also, which is very important of this treaty, and water is different to land. The land, you can measure it very proper. But the amount of water, you cannot measure it. You cannot have a deterministic number, because it depends on the amount of water it rains. So some years it rains a lot, other years it doesn't rain a lot, and sometimes it rains a lot in January, or another times it rains a lot in December. So we need to have treaties that are flexible, and this treaty have a system of acts that enable to provide this flexibility, to have a transparency of information for both citizens, because sometimes you have all the governments discussing and reaching an agreement, but the people is not aware of, and they may be or may not be not in agreement. But in these cases, there is a complete transparency of information. Anybody can now click, not at the beginning, but they can go into the website and know how the amount of water each country has and for what they are using it. Also, there is an equitable distribution of water according to the size of the basin and their economic and social activity. This is one principle that might be, or is sometimes questioned by some countries, is that if one country is already using the water for an economic purpose, the second one has to limit its use to the amount of water that is being used. That is to say, is first in right, first in time, first in right. So for developed countries, but they normally are using more water than well, now I will use the new terms. The minority world is using much more water because they have a higher development than the minority world, which are using less water, and normally in treaties they have a lower amount of water. And also the treaty have mechanisms to mitigate the climate variability, this thing that I was talking later about how to manage the water when there are droughts are also very important now that we are under climate change scenarios. Next slide, please. Well, as I said, this was the basis for many other water management systems that have been used by UNEP, by UNESCO, by UNICEF, and FAO. And many different organizations are using this international under international, at the international legal frameworks are using these principles that were built between Canada, United States, and Mexico. Next slide, please. So this is used in the convention to protect and use the transboundary water courses and international lakes, the famous water convention, the Helsinki Convention, and now we have a new set of rules, the Berlin rules, that have not been adopted international, and honestly, I don't think they're going to be adopted soon because they try to arrange the world very perfectly from an economic point of view, but as you know, there are political issues always, and I'm afraid they will take long at least to be adopted. Next slide, please. And I think, next slide. So now we are talking about how sharing the water, but as well, we have this concept of water security that is part of the need to share water, and it's linked to several definitions. Only one definition has been approved by member states, and is the definition of UNESCO. The last one that was in New York by UN Water is not approved by member states because it has a political connotation, which says that if one country is used in an insecure way the water, there are other legislations about security that would mean that this country could be intervened by another country because it's a security issues. Mixing this idea of security in terms of war with water security. So it's a very difficult consideration. Next slide, please. So what we need to take when we have a problem, first to train water authorities on all the different ways to share water. I went very fast, but one thing is important is that when we are sharing water, if we fix our mind on sharing volumes of water, most probably we will be ending having problems. What we need to share is water, but as well the benefits of water. It's like Canada made with the United States. They give them the water, but they share the benefits of the power generation. So this is a different approach, and because water can be used in several times and in series, there are many benefits that can be produced, and there are many things that could help us to have a better cooperation. That's why it is very important to think about reuse of water when we are talking about the sharing water, and to help people to not fix only on the volume of water, but fix their mind in the benefits of using the water. Next slide, please. And that is why if we are talking about international water, we need to talk about cooperation, which is another term that is very well, and I think I will end here to have more questions, is we talk about international water, then we talk about water cooperation. In 2013, this was a novel idea, and it was even the International Year of Water Cooperation, to focus more on how to collaborate among users and among countries, rather to focus on conflicts. And from that concept of water cooperation, it also was born the concept of water diplomacy, which are all the people that helps the people and the art of using skills of diplomacy, of talking, of discussing, on focusing more in the long term and focusing more in the solution of problems rather than focusing on the problems. And now it's even, there are several universities, several Ph.D. courses, theses, articles that talk about water diplomacy applying to different problems in the world between countries, but as well at the interior of the countries, because we have conflicts between different types of users. And I think I will end here so we can have a time for some questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Blanca. That was excellent. I'll just stop sharing. And if there are any questions, you can ask directly. You can simply switch on your microphone and your camera. So let's take live questions first. And I saw that there are also some questions in the chat box, and we'll also come to that. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the thoughtful presentation. And I'm the one just posted a question there. So I just want to know, like, how well the coupled human water systems been considered on all those decisions in your past experiences, and what is the vital role of a socio-hydrological approach? Because what I see in the past, these consideration not being done, like authoritative decisions from the top is being done. But have you come across the cases that it's eventually fail when we look at the issue in a socio-hydrological point of view, like people doesn't accept and eventually it affects the people more than the original condition? So just share something, because I'm doing that sort of research in my curriculum, so it will be helpful to hear from you. Thank you.
You are completely right. If you don't consider the people, it doesn't work. All this treaty doesn't work. That's why I was telling that it's very important to be transparent, because in many occasions, the vision of the government, they want to develop an industry, but the local people wants to do other type of agriculture or cultural uses. So that makes fail. And if you're working at international level and you don't have the people behind you, the risk of failure is very important, because you have a problem with a different country. It's no doubt is it's not important. It's very, very important. It's indispensable.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have another question from Jean. Jean, would you like to directly ask, or? Okay, so maybe I'll just read the question. You mentioned that one of the reasons why there were tensions over water in Africa is that the borders there are artificial. I've had a hard time thinking of borders that were established naturally, whether in North America, Asia, or Europe, that is, unless we consider war natural. Is it not time to retire this argument for the discussion of conflicts in Africa? And yes, so that is the question.
It's a complicated question, because it's much more a political decision, and normally political decisions, the technical bases are only bases, and at the end, the decisions are taken technically. So I think there is not, in general, universal solution for any of these problems, and any problem with sharing water has to be analyzed in the local context, considering, of course, the technical point of view, because it gives you the amount of water, on what you can use the water, how much it will cost. But then you will have to mix this theory on what people want, what is viable, and the cost. So it is really complicated, and you need to take decisions on local basis.
Thank you. Is there another question?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure. Go ahead, Hassan.
Hi, ma'am. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. My question is more of on the social sciences side. Do you think that these recent trends of threatening territorial sovereignty of various nations has something to do with this water scarcity? I mean, uh, I'm not a social sciences student, but there has been a continuous trend. For example, Trump has been threatening to annex Canada. Israel is showing like maps for Greater Israel. I'm from Pakistan. Even Pakistan is threatening Afghanistan to capture this Wakhan corridor. Uh, as far as I remember, there has been, there was always this respect for the territorial sovereignty, which we're not seeing these days. Everybody is just like trying to grab the other land. Do you think it is motivated by this scarcity of resources, including water?
Yes, I think that, and which is sad in all that we are talking of, what you were saying is that maybe some countries are much more behind the resources, including water, than interested on the people.
True.
Is really sad, but I think we have many examples these days to show that.
Mhm.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, this is Ricardo Izurieta from
Hello,
Los Angeles.
Ricardo. It is always wonderful to see you. Thanks for
The
joining.
same. Thank you to Dr. Blanca Jiménez. It's a great presentation, and really thank you for taking care for these issues, which are extremely important. My question is, in situations like the Amazonian rainforest, the water of the Amazonian rainforest, that which problems may go beyond the country boundaries, and it can, the problems can imply an impact in the region and even in the world. Which institutions do you think should take care for this kind of global problems? To which institutions should we proceed to address these problems that we have, for example, in the Amazonian rainforest?
Well, that's a tough question because, and it's going to sound a little bit harsh, given that I have been working at the United Nations organization. But what I realize is that many of the United Nations organizations have interest as well and are dominated by some countries. So it's not that simple. And I think that, to be honest, each country has to defend their sovereignty, and they have to defend their resources themselves. And that's also why I've been talking about treaties, but all these treaties only affect surface water. Only some groundwater that are linked to surface international rivers or lakes are considered. And the reason is because simply for groundwater, which is more complicated, there are no countries wanted to go into any discussion. And also these rules of Berlin that were produced by academic people, by professionals, they are there, but countries don't want to discuss and to have a single organization deciding that, because it's so complex that they prefer each organization to decide. That's at the international level. But at the national level, I truly believe that it's very important to have only one organization dealing with water. A good example is that the United States. United States has federated water and is the country who has the greatest overexploitations of groundwater in the world, because each state does how they want, and there is no protection of groundwater. Even surface water, there are some states that are taking more water than the upper stream states, more water than the others, and there is not even their water rights is the same in different states. So it's very difficult to discuss with them, and the only thing that suffers is water as a resource. You have a national organizations that cover all is better, but only some countries have that, and I think it should be better to have only one organization. Then you will have the discussion if this organization should be under the Minister of Environment or on the Minister of Economy, and some other discussion.
I understand. Thank you, Dr. Jimenez. Thank you, Blanca.
Thank you, Ricardo, and that's an excellent point. Also, the groundwater issue. So, California and the wildfires just happen to be in the news these days, and it is so sad. But California population is so large, there's simply not enough water for the number of people living there. And if there is not enough water, like what are you gonna do? And they heavily rely on groundwater. And then, I mean, Americans, if it's my land, it's my groundwater. There have been lots of issues when there isn't enough water for everyone. And I just heard it in the news again, also the misinformation. So if you take groundwater, if you keep taking it more and more, and if you're right next to the ocean, it's a system that fills itself. It balances. So you get ocean water into your huge groundwater reservoir, and then whatever you have is not drinkable anymore. It just pollutes the whole groundwater system. And so what California does, I mean, they're so desperate, they treat their wastewater to the level. This is the Orange County wastewater treatment plant, to the drinking water level. So you can basically take a sip of water at the end of the wastewater treatment plant, and they have to pump it back into the ocean, the reservoirs, the groundwater table, just to keep the system in balance, so the ocean water doesn't get into the groundwater. And then,
but which is sad,
I hear the politicians these days. I mean, there is no information, there's no knowledge. It's just like they blame each other but it's a great example of the importance of groundwater as a whole. The climate change, it's just gonna get such a mess, even domestically, like regionally within a country, and unfortunately, it's gonna be even uglier internationally.
Right. I totally agree. We have exhausted here in the region the groundwater, and I think that is having an impact not just in the water, but in the whole environment with these fires, definitely. Thank you for the commentaries.
And nobody talks about that, no? It's it's really incredible.
Okay, so there's one last question, and we can conclude the talk. What is your thoughts on progress of the water governance towards sustainability? Are we in improving trend or getting towards worse scenarios?
Well, it depends on each country, but I would like to have a word on the idea of water governance, that was the water governance concept was also developed as part of a neoliberalism idea, in which the idea is that the state shouldn't be ruling the water, but it should be more ruling by people. Which, but the people at the end is also a kind of privatization, even if it is an ONG. So there is a discussion, I think, much more deep that need to be analyzed. If it is the government we are accountable that should be ruling the water, or it should be the social part, because, well, I don't know, but I know in my country, several NGOs receive money from private companies and they are lobbying, not for the people, but for the countries. And sometimes they are protecting the interests of one country against others. So it's not that easy. I don't have a solution, of course. But
Yeah,
something.
maybe I'm the one asked the question because I'm from the country called Sri Lanka. Just now, Professor was mentioning, we have 8 ministries and 12 departments dealing with the water.
Wow.
And the money come from overseas, from NGOs and like big donors. The decisions made without considering the people's aspirations. So the governance model by the people, it's so important for such countries to deal with sustainable solutions. Otherwise you'll be keep doing the things and it's not going to solve the people's aspirations at the end of the day. It may be a short-term aspiration, but it doesn't give you a permanent solution or sustainable solution. So that's why that the water governance is so important for many countries in the world. So
yeah, well, I would like to read your thesis when you will be done with it.
thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining this talk, and thank you, Her Excellency, the Ambassador of
Banu.
Mexico in France, our Blanca Jiménez Cisneros, a dear friend to the water community all around the world, and such a source of knowledge. And I would also like to thank again the Embassy of Mexico in Canada, in Ottawa, for making this event possible. So thank you, everyone. We'll post the recording, and then you can also share the recording with your colleagues and friends. Thank you again, and have a nice day.
Everybody, and thank you, Banu, for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.